You don't need to worry about the will. There's nothing left for you. The words landed heavier than the silence that followed them. My brother didn't even look at me when he said it. He stood near the window of our father's study, sunlight cutting across his suit like a spotlight, calm and confident, as if he were delivering a weather update, not erasing my future. Nothing left. I had buried my father 3 days earlier. The house still smelled like incense and old books. His chair was empty. His pen lay exactly where he'd left it, aligned with the edge of the desk the way he always did. My brother closed a leather folder and slid it into his briefcase, already moving on. He changed everything at the end, he continued, finally meeting my eyes. He didn't want complications. Complications. That's what I was now. I opened my mouth to speak, but grief stole my voice. My father had raised us to believe in fairness, painfully so. Equal portions. Equal responsibility. Equal love. I had heard him say it 100 times. Yet here I was, being told I was worth nothing in the final accounting of his life. Where was I when this happened? I asked quietly. My brother shrugged. You were unavailable. Unavailable. I had been sitting beside my father's hospital bed, counting his breaths. He handed me a single sheet of paper. A copy. Not the will, just a summary. Properties transferred. Accounts closed. Everything signed, sealed, finished. My name didn't appear once. I stared at the signature at the bottom. It looked like my father's name, but something about it felt wrong. Too neat. Too rushed. My father's hand had trembled in the final weeks. When did he sign this? I asked. Late night. He was clear-headed, my brother said smoothly. The lawyer was present. What lawyer? He paused for half a second too long. The family lawyer. You wouldn't remember. I did remember, and I knew that lawyer had been overseas the week my father died. But I said nothing. That was the first mistake he made, assuming silence meant ignorance. The days that followed moved strangely. Relatives praised my brother for handling everything. They spoke to me with pity, as if I were a dependent who had lost both a parent and a purpose. I nodded. I thanked them. I swallowed the humiliation because grief had hollowed me out. At night, I sat alone in my childhood room, listening to the house settle around me. Every creak sounded like an accusation. I replayed my father's words in my head, his habits, his principles. He had taught me to read contracts carefully, to trust evidence over emotion. And yet, I was expected to accept this without question. On the 4th night, I returned to his study. I wasn't looking for proof, just comfort. I opened drawers I hadn't touched since I was a child. Old letters, warranty documents, receipts. Then, at the back of a locked cabinet, I found a small envelope with my name written in my father's handwriting. Inside was a handwritten note, dated 2 months before his death. Everything is to be divided equally. If anyone tells you otherwise, they are lying. My hands shook. That was the moment grief turned into clarity. My brother hadn't taken the inheritance after my father died. He had taken it while my father was still alive. And he believed I would stay silent forever. If there was something wrong, you would have said it by now. My brother's voice drifted across the dining table, casual and almost amused. Family had gathered for the first time since the funeral, and he had taken his usual place at the head, carving meat with steady confidence, like a man who owned not just the house, but everyone in it. I kept my eyes on my plate. Silence had become my armor. Everyone believed the story he told. That our father had grown distant from me. That I had disappointed him. That the inheritance had been a reward for responsibility. No one questioned it because no one wanted to. I watched my brother carefully. He had changed. His patience was sharper now, his generosity louder. He paid for meals. He spoke of investments. He talked about legacy, as if he had earned the right to use the word. You're very quiet these days, my aunt said gently. You should move on. Move on from what? From being erased? I smiled politely and excused myself. That night, I laid everything out on my bed. The envelope, the note, copies of old emails my father had sent me, birthday cards signed with the same shaky hand. I compared them to the signature on the inheritance summary. Side by side. The difference screamed. My father's real signature leaned slightly left. The forged one stood upright, rigid, careful. Too careful. The next morning, I returned to the hospital. I didn't announce myself. I didn't accuse anyone. I asked simple questions. I requested my father's medical records under my name as next of kin. The clerk hesitated, then nodded. He was heavily sedated during his last 48 hours, she said. There was no signing of documents during that time. I thanked her and left, my pulse pounding. One lie exposed another. Over the following weeks, I became invisible by choice. I declined family invitations. I congratulated my brother on his promotions. I listened more than I spoke. Every conversation revealed something new, dates that didn't align, witnesses who couldn't be named, stories that shifted slightly each time they were told. He believed he had won. That confidence made him careless. One evening, he mentioned the lawyer again. He said everything was airtight. My brother told a cousin, laughing. Nothing to challenge. I wrote the name down. The real family lawyer confirmed my suspicion within minutes of my call. I wasn't in the country when your father passed, he said slowly. And I never witnessed a revised will. That night, I sat alone and finally cried. Not from loss, but from certainty. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was theft. I hired a lawyer 2 days later. Not one connected to our family. Not one who cared about appearances. I placed the envelope on his desk and watched his expression change as he read. Why are you coming forward now? He asked. I folded my hands. Because the person who did this thinks I'm afraid. He nodded. Good. Fear makes people quiet. A confidence makes them sloppy. We began in secret. Document requests. Signature analysis. Timestamp verification. Financial audits. Each discovery tightened the noose my brother couldn't see. Months passed. My brother sent me a message one night. Still no hard feelings, right? Family is family. I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. Of course, I wrote. I trust you. And for the first time since my father died, that lie felt powerful. Because while my brother believed my silence meant surrender, I was preparing to speak in the only place where lies could not survive. A courtroom. And when I finally spoke, everyone would hear. I don't understand why you're digging into this now. My brother's words echoed in my head as I walked into the records office, but he wasn't there. He had said them weeks earlier over the phone, his tone half annoyed, half amused. He thought curiosity was my weakness. He didn't realize it was discipline. I had stopped reacting. That was the second thing that unsettled him. The records office smelled like dust and toner. I signed my name and waited while a clerk disappeared into the back. When she returned, she slid a folder across the counter and lowered her voice. These are the property transfers you requested, she said. Some of them were processed unusually fast. Unusually fast meant corners were cut. I thanked her and stepped outside, flipping through pages as I walked. Dates jumped out immediately. Transfers filed less than 24 hours after my father's recorded time of death. Authorizations approved before the death certificate had even been issued. Someone had been in a hurry. I forwarded copies to my lawyer that same afternoon. He called me within minutes. This is good, he said. Very good. But the strongest cases aren't built on one inconsistency. They're built on patterns. So we kept digging. Bank statements came next. Large withdrawals. Account closures that required in-person verification my father could not have provided. Security logs showed badge access to the bank on a day my father was documented as bedridden. Every document contradicted the story my brother had told so confidently. What shocked me most wasn't the scale of the theft, but the carelessness. He had assumed authority would protect him, that no one would question the person who stepped forward first, wearing grief like a badge of honor. At home, the house felt different now. Rooms that once comforted me felt staged, like a set designed to sell a lie. I found more evidence without even trying. Envelopes in the trash, drafts of letters never sent, notes written in my brother's handwriting practicing my father's signature. Practicing. That was the night my hands stopped shaking. I photographed everything. My brother grew restless. He called more often, dropped by unannounced, asked questions disguised as concern. "You've been meeting lawyers?" he asked one afternoon, leaning against the doorframe of my room. "That's expensive." I looked up calmly. "So is fraud." His smile froze for just a moment. Not long enough for anyone else to notice, but I noticed. "You're imagining things," he said. "You always did." Gaslighting came easily to him. It always had. But this time I had receipts. Weeks later, the handwriting expert's report arrived.
Clean.
Clinical. Unemotional. The signatures on the inheritance documents did not match my father's known handwriting samples. Probability of forgery. Extremely high. I read the sentence twice, then set the report down gently, as if it might break. That night, I dreamed of my father for the first time since his death. He wasn't sick. He wasn't tired. He simply nodded, once, as if to say, "Now." The next morning, my lawyer filed the initial motion to freeze the assets. My brother found out within hours. He stormed into the house, anger finally cracking his perfect composure. "You're making a huge mistake," he snapped. "Do you know what this will do to the family?" I met his eyes, steady and unafraid. "Yes," I said. "It will finally tell them the truth." For the first time, he had no answer. And for the first time, he understood that silence had never been surrender. It had been preparation. "This is getting out of hand. You need to stop." My brother's voice was low, urgent, stripped of its usual polish. We stood in the hallway outside our father's study, the same place where he had first told me there was nothing left for me. Now, for the first time, he looked uncertain. I closed the door behind me carefully. "You should talk to your lawyer."
His jaw tightened.
"You think this makes you look strong? Dragging our family into court?" "I didn't drag anyone," I replied. "I followed the paper trail. It led to you." That was when the mask finally slipped. He laughed sharply. "You don't have proof." I took out my phone and placed it on the desk. One by one, I slid the documents forward. The handwriting analysis, hospital sedation records, bank access logs, property transfer timestamps.
He stopped laughing.
The room felt smaller as the weight of evidence settled between us. He stared at the papers like they might rearrange themselves into something harmless. "You always needed help," he said finally. "Father knew that." I leaned forward. "Then why did he write this?" I placed the handwritten note in front of him. "Everything is to be divided equally." His face drained of color. "That means nothing," he said quickly. "Anyone could fake that." "Yes," I agreed calmly. "That's exactly the problem." He stood abruptly, pacing. "You think the court will side with you? I've already moved the money. It's gone." "That's why the accounts are frozen," I said. He froze mid-step. That was the moment fear replaced arrogance. Over the next few days, the family began to feel the tremors. Relatives whispered. Invitations were canceled. My brother stopped posting about his success. His phone rang constantly. He started arriving home late, exhausted, snapping at everyone. The lawsuit was no longer a rumor, it was public record. My lawyer moved fast. Subpoenas were issued. The bank manager was questioned. The clerk who processed the documents was placed on leave. Each action pulled another thread from my brother's carefully woven story. He called me one night, voice shaking with anger and desperation. "You could still drop this," he said. "We can settle privately." "For what?" I asked. "An apology, you don't mean?" Silence. "You think you're winning," he said quietly. "But you're going to lose everything." I ended the call without answering. At the first pre-hearing conference, my brother sat across the room from me, flanked by expensive attorneys. He didn't look at me once. His confidence had turned into rigid stillness, like a statue pretending not to crack. The judge's tone was measured, impartial. Deadlines were set. Evidence schedules established. This wasn't a family dispute anymore. It was a legal reckoning. Outside the courtroom, reporters gathered. A cousin recognized me and whispered, "Is it true?" "Yes," I said simply. That single word traveled faster than any lie ever had. That evening, I returned to my father's grave. I stood there longer than I intended, the sky darkening above me. I didn't want this, I said aloud. But I won't let him rewrite you. The wind moved through the trees, gentle and steady. For the first time, I felt something close to peace. Because the lie was no longer comfortable. It was exposed, cornered, and sweating. And the hearing that would destroy it was already scheduled. State your name for the record. My brother's voice sounded different when he answered, tight, rehearsed, stripped of authority. The courtroom was full. Relatives occupied the back rows, sitting apart as if separation might protect them from the fallout. A few journalists lined the walls, pens ready. I sat behind my lawyer, hands folded, listening. The judge adjusted his glasses. You oversaw the execution of the revised inheritance documents? Yes, my brother replied. Our father was of sound mind. My lawyer stood. According to hospital records, she said calmly, the deceased was under heavy sedation at the time you claim he signed. Can you explain that? My brother hesitated. Just a fraction of a second, but enough.
He insisted, he said.
He was lucid. My lawyer nodded and turned to the screen. Medical charts appeared.
Dates.
Dosages.
Times.
Doctor's notes indicate loss of consciousness at 8:15 p.m. You claim the signature occurred at 9:40 p.m., which is correct. Murmurs rippled through the room. My brother swallowed. The records must be wrong. The judge leaned forward. Hospital records are rarely wrong. Next came the handwriting expert.
Calm. Precise.
The probability that the signature belongs to the deceased is extremely low, she said. Multiple pressure inconsistencies indicate forgery. My brother's attorney objected. Overruled. Then the bank manager testified. Then the records clerk. Each statement dismantled another piece of my brother's narrative. The story he had lived inside for years collapsed in hours. Finally, my lawyer called me. As I took the stand, I felt every eye in the room. I didn't speak of anger. I didn't raise my voice. I trusted my brother, I said. That's why I stayed silent. I assumed there had to be an explanation. But silence gave him time, not truth. The judge listened carefully. I presented the handwritten note my father had left me. The courtroom went still as the date was read aloud, 2 months before his death. My brother stared at the floor. The judge removed his glasses. The court finds sufficient evidence to invalidate the revised documents. All transferred assets are to be frozen pending redistribution. Further investigation into potential fraud is ordered. The gavel struck once. Just like that, everything changed. Outside the courtroom, cameras flashed. Questions were shouted. My brother pushed past them, face pale, reputation in pieces. A reporter asked me, "Do you feel victorious?" I paused. "No," I said. "I feel finished." That night, I went home alone. I sat in the study where this began, surrounded by the quiet my brother had once mistaken for weakness. Justice hadn't been loud. It had been patient. And it had finally spoken. "You're being investigated for fraud." The words followed my brother out of the courtroom like a sentence that refused to end. Criminal proceedings moved slower than civil ones, but their shadow was heavier. Accounts remained frozen. Properties sat in legal limbo. Invitations stopped coming. A family that once orbited him now avoided his name. I watched the collapse from a distance. Not with satisfaction. Only with clarity. Consequences are quieter than revenge, but far more permanent. My brother stopped calling. Instead, I received messages from relatives who had ignored me for years. Some apologized. Some asked for forgiveness they hadn't earned. Others simply wanted reassurance that the money they'd borrowed from him wouldn't disappear. I gave none. The prosecutor's office contacted me for a formal statement. They didn't need emotion. They needed facts. I gave them everything: documents, timelines, patterns. "Why didn't you come forward sooner?" one investigator asked. "Because I trusted family," I replied. "I won't make that mistake again." The house was sold under court supervision. The study emptied. Our father's belongings were cataloged and divided properly at last. Holding his watch in my hands, I felt the strange relief of closure done right, late, but honest. My brother tried once more. He appeared at my door late one evening, thinner, older, stripped of the confidence that had protected him for years. "We can still fix this," he said. "Say, it was a misunderstanding." I looked at him carefully. "You forged a dying man's signature." His voice broke. "I did what I had to." "No," I said. "You did what you wanted." That was the last conversation we ever had. Months later, the final ruling arrived. Assets were redistributed according to the original intent. My share was substantial, but it felt lighter than I expected. Money can't replace integrity. It can only reveal who never had it. The criminal case proceeded quietly.
No dramatic sentencing.
Just records, penalties, and a permanent stain on his name. One afternoon, I visited my father's grave again. "It's done," I said softly. "They know who you were." The wind moved through the trees the way it had before. For years, my brother had worn our family name like armor. In the end, it became his burden. And I walked away carrying nothing but the truth. "You're being investigated for fraud." The words followed my brother out of the courtroom like a sentence that refused to end. Criminal proceedings moved slower than civil ones, but their shadow was heavier. Accounts remained frozen. Properties sat in legal limbo. Invitations stopped coming. A family that once orbited him now avoided his name. I watched the collapse from a distance. Not with satisfaction. Only with clarity. Consequences are quieter than revenge, but far more permanent. My brother stopped calling. Instead, I received messages from relatives who had ignored me for years. Some apologized. Some asked for forgiveness they hadn't earned. Others simply wanted reassurance that the money they'd borrowed from him wouldn't disappear. I gave none. The prosecutor's office contacted me for a formal statement. They didn't need emotion. They needed facts. I gave them everything: documents, timelines, patterns. "Why didn't you come forward sooner?" one investigator asked. "Because I trusted family," I replied. "I won't make that mistake again." The house was sold under court supervision. The study emptied. Our father's belongings were catalogued and divided properly at last. Holding his watch in my hands, I felt the strange relief of closure done right, late, but honest. My brother tried once more. He appeared at my door late one evening, thinner, older, stripped of the confidence that had protected him for years. "We can still fix this," he said. "Say, it was a misunderstanding." I looked at him carefully. "You forged a dying man's signature." His voice broke. "I did what I had to." "No," I said. "You did what you wanted." That was the last conversation we ever had. Months later, the final ruling arrived. Assets were redistributed according to the original intent. My share was substantial, but it felt lighter than I expected. Money can't replace integrity. It can only reveal who never had it. The criminal case proceeded quietly.
No dramatic sentencing.
Just records, penalties, and a permanent stain on his name. One afternoon, I visited my father's grave again. "It's done," I said softly. "They know who you were." The wind moved through the trees the way it had before. For years, my brother had worn our family name like armor. In the end, it became his burden. And I walked away carrying nothing but the truth. "I hope you find peace in this." The letter arrived without a return address. My brother's handwriting was unmistakable, still careful, still controlled, as if discipline alone could undo what he had done. I read the sentence once, then folded the paper and set it aside. Some words arrived too late to matter. Life didn't reset after the case ended. It reorganized. The family gatherings grew smaller. Seats once filled by loud certainty remained empty. People spoke more carefully now, as if truth had taught them caution. I noticed how often silence followed my name, no longer dismissive, just respectful. I moved out of the old house and into a place of my own. Nothing grand, nothing inherited. The first thing I hung on the wall was my father's note, framed simply, not as evidence, but as a reminder. Everything is to be divided equally. Not money, not property, responsibility. I was asked once, during an interview that never aired, whether I regretted taking the case public.
No, I said.
Private lies grow. Public truth ends things. They didn't use the quote. My brother's sentence was finalized months later. Financial penalties, community service, professional disbarment from boards he once boasted about. No prison, but consequences that followed him everywhere. We never spoke again. Sometimes I thought about who he might have been if he had trusted fairness instead of control. That thought never lasted long. Hypotheticals don't heal. Acceptance does. On the anniversary of my father's death, I returned to the cemetery alone. I didn't bring flowers. I brought time. I sat and spoke to him the way I never had when he was alive, honestly, without urgency. They tried to erase you, I said quietly. They couldn't. The sky was clear. The air steady. Walking away, I realized something that surprised me. The story wasn't about inheritance. It never had been. It was about a lie that demanded silence, and a truth that refused it. I didn't win by taking anything back. I won by standing where the lie ended. And when I left the cemetery, I didn't look over my shoulder. Nothing was chasing me anymore.